All right, so welcome to Understanding Diabetes in my class. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving a little bit of background relative to, yep, Gabs, thanks, my daughter. A little bit of background on what led me here. So I don't know if any of you guys have seen or follow us on I Love, but I used to be a professor. I have a bachelor's and a master's in corporate communication. I was in corporate a lot, so I did strategic planning or organizational change management stuff. And then I was a professor at HPU, then became the assistant dean for the Gen Ed program, helped to revamp that, try and add more Hawaiian cultural classes in it and sustainability initiatives in it. I became the board president for Sustain Hawaii, which is our nonprofit. And then I ended up leaving that because we got hired, Sustain Hawaii got hired to do a food systems metrics platform. And in creating that, I ended up doing about 175, 200 page report on the Hawaii food system Hawaii food system. And in that report, I discovered all kinds of crazy stuff. You know, of course, our high self-reliance on importation of food here in Hawaii. But one of the things that really stuck out for me was identifying the food deserts here in Hawaii. And basically, it's all the low-income areas. I grew up in Nanakuli. I live in Waimanalo now, high Native Hawaiian populated areas, and of course, low income. So I started to realize that that's so true. In these areas, there's not a lot of healthy options for people. So, you can go convenience stores like 7-Eleven, go get, day-old churros and hot dogs that spin on the spit and, just all kinds of sugary stuff and crap food. So we decided, you know what, I was going to leave the university and start I Love Nalo and open the restaurant. And a lot of people said that we were crazy because you're going to open a vegan restaurant in Waimanalo. So, but we took the leap of faith anyway and did it because we just felt that it was necessary. And then we opened and it was growing and whatnot. And I realized that there was a lot of people that were coming from various communities, but not necessarily from the low income areas, including my own community. So, and then what happened was I had a gentleman come in while I was at work and he had to have open heart surgery and, but he was obese. And so he needed to lose weight and he was having a really hard time doing that. And so I sat with him and I chatted and he basically said he was still going to all the fast food places and eating their salads, which is mostly iceberg lettuce, which is mostly water, very low nutrients compared to the dark leafy greens. And then, of course, all of the fattening dressings and all the toppings on it, right? The bacon bits, the chicken and all that stuff. So I said to him, hey, I'll help you, but if you make a commitment, I'm going to feed you 2 meals a day, 6 days a week for 3 months. We raised money through the nonprofit and was able to fund that for him. And then he was able to lose about 25 pounds. He had his open heart surgery and then it was a success. So he ended up introducing me to his friend and then his friend's friend. And then pretty soon it was lots of people that were asking for help. So because my doctorate is in education and I used to write curriculum, I thought, I'm just going to design a program. I named it Ha'ehu'ola, which means promoting wellness and health. And I centered it around the 7 levels of health. And what the 7 levels of health include are the physical body, the psychological aspect of the human body, which includes your emotional and mental state, and then your financial health, because that's often ignored. And that's the me aspect. And then we also, because we're into sustainability, we looked at the we aspects because everything is interdependent and interrelated. So we started to look at ecological health as well and realizing that it's a crucial component to our overall health and well-being. Our society, so socio-cultural, and then the economics. Obviously, we're feeling that now with COVID-19. So, and then all of that is enveloped with spiritual health. So in the Ha'ehu'ola program, I teach about the 7 levels of health. And oftentimes we get pulled a lot into the physical aspect tied to food and whatnot, but everything is connected. And what I mean by that, I'll give you a quick example. our food is grown, of course, in the soil. If the soil is not healthy, then the food and the nutrients of the plants that you're eating or the fruit that you're eating is not as healthy. So if you're getting conventional, like say fruit that has been sprayed with Roundup, then the glyphosate that's in the fruit itself, you're congesting. And so your body is battling all of that. So you're thinking that you're eating really healthily by having an apple, but if it's conventionally grown, then it's not as healthy as what you think it is. In fact, in the research that I did for the Hawaii Department of Ag, I discovered there was a big study that was done, and they found that you have to eat 20 conventional apples to one organic apple to get the same nutrient value. So oftentimes people don't realize those things. So the ecological aspect is super, super important. And then of course, community is really important, because we can't thrive without a community and without family and friends and whatnot. So every aspect has been molded and folded into the Haihola program. So anyway, I had a successful year in 2019. I took a hula halau through the whole program. The program is usually a year long. I taught them weekly. I would go to them every Thursday at 6 o'clock, and I would teach them for about an hour, and then they would have their hula afterwards. The kumu leimomi was just amazing. And the results were phenomenal. In a year's time, I think in total, the halau of 30 members, I think 28 ended up staying through the whole program, lost about 450 pounds collectively. The average percentage of weight loss was about 7 to 8% of their body weight. And I believe that a lot of them are still keeping off that body weight. And it's because they made a lifestyle change. So anyway, when COVID hit, I was so bummed because we had to kind of suspend Haiho'ola. And then my daughter was like, Mom, why don't you just go on Zoom and just do these classes? So because it's my passion and that's what I love to do. So anyway, yeah, so I'm going to be sharing with you different classes. I'm going to be offering it probably either every Thursday or every other Thursday. It depends on how interested people are. But one of the most requested topics is about diabetes. And I think it's because there's a lot of people in Hawaii that have diabetes. In fact, there was this 2019 study that came out that said that diabetes has increased by 10% over the past 2 years. So that's pretty nuts. So a lot of times people don't really know why they have diabetes, or they don't realize that type 2 diabetes is very different from type 1 and that it can actually be reversed, which is some of the outcomes that we had with the Haihola members. So anyway, so let's jump in with understanding diabetes. I do have notes, so I'm going to be kind of referring to my notes. So let's start off with in general. So and I'm going to give you some statistics about diabetes. So in America, about 34 plus million Americans have diabetes. Among that, about 5% of them are type 1, and between 90 to 95, dependent upon who does the study, is type 2 diabetes. And there's a big difference between the two. And I'll explain that in quite detail. So type 1 is usually genetic. It used to be called the juvenile onset diabetes. The reason why is because it was genetic. A majority of the time, people with type 1 would be identified or diagnosed at a younger age, either as a child or in their teens. So it was kind of, and long ago, that's what it was called, but now it's not being called that because a lot of children are actually getting diabetes now. The type 1 diabetes, like I said, it is genetic, but it also can be caused by environmental triggers, including viruses. So that's one of the reasons why some of the epidemiologists and researchers relative to COVID-19 is concerned, not only because it'll impact people with diabetes, but also it could actually create an onset because of viral infection. Of course, we would have to wait for longitudinal studies, but that is a concern. And what happens in type 1 diabetes, so I'm just going to jump right in. So what happens in type 1 diabetes is our pancreas usually creates insulin. And the insulin is really important for allowing, and I'll show you a video, like a quick snapshot of what I mean. But usually what happens is the insulin opens the doorway in your cells for glucose to be able to go into your cells. But with type 1 diabetics, they do not make insulin or do not make enough insulin. The blood sugar backs up in their bloodstream. Okay, and so that's why the treatment is they have to give themselves insulin and have other medication, but usually it's insulin. So that's type 1 diabetes. So with type 2 diabetes, it's very, very different. Type 2 diabetes was previously called juvenile onset diabetes. The type 2 was called adult onset diabetes because they were mostly seeing it happening in people that are 40 and above. And before it was like, well, we didn't know what was causing it, but now we know what's causing it. It is, instead of insulin where you're not making insulin production, in type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. And what that means is that the insulin cannot penetrate the cells. So what happens is the glucose in the bloodstream backs up and pools, and then it starts collecting, and then that's when you have diabetes happening. So what causes insulin resistance? Well, when we eat food, what immediately happens is the food goes into our digestive system, and then it breaks down into glucose. Okay, and glucose is very important. Glucose is actually the energy that's put into our cells that allows us to do anything: hike, breathe, walk, work, do whatever, play with our kids. So glucose is really important. Too much glucose in our bloodstream is when we have problems. So what happens usually is that glucose will enter into our circulatory system, so our bloodstream, and then that blood sugar flows down to our cells, because what the glucose is trying to do is it's trying to get into the cell. And what happens is with type 2 diabetes, usually glucose will come down to the cell. I'm going to pull this up so that you guys can see it, because I can explain it better this way. So I'm going to share my screen. This is what I want to show you. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. So what this is this represents your cell. So the purple is the cell. And on each cell, you have what's called insulin receptors, okay? When your pancreas, when you eat food, your pancreas gets alerted, hey, there's food coming. We have to send insulin to the cells because we need to make sure that the glucose can enter the cell and then give the cell energy. So what happens is, usually the insulin will drop into the insulin receptor, and insulin usually acts like a key. So the receptors is kind of like a lock, and the insulin is a key. So the insulin drops into the insulin receptor, and then what happens is the glucose transporter, once the key goes into the lock, the glucose transporter on the left, that yellow thing, the glucose will then be able to drop into that glucose transporter, and then it slides into the cell. And this is very rudimentary, but this is pretty much what happens, okay? So usually this is a normal functioning, but someone with type 2 diabetes, oftentimes their cell, or not oftentimes, all the time, their cell is full of fat, okay? And this fat in the cell starts to block the insulin receptors. So imagine it being kind of like you're trying to get into your car or your house, and there's nothing wrong with your key, and you're trying to stick it in the lock, but there's like gunk in the lock, like someone put gum or something in it, and you can't get your key to get into that lock. This is exactly what's happening with type 2 diabetes, because the cell is full of fat, which also spills over into the insulin receptors, blocking the insulin from being able to get in. So what it does is the insulin gets pushed back, like the key can't open the lock. And it's very it's important and necessary to know that without insulin, you cannot open the glucose transporter. So what happens is the glucose transporter, because the key can't fit in the lock, the glucose transporter is locked. And so the glucose cannot drop into the transporter and go into the cell. And so what happens is your body then starts to have this glucose backup in your blood system. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what happens in your body. Now, what's interesting is that it's the fat, what they've discovered is it's the fat that's causing this insulin resistance. Now, there's tons of studies that has taken place that they have shown that with a particular diet, like how Babs said, it can actually help to reverse this issue. Because when someone, as adults, we basically have all the fat cells primarily in our body. And when someone becomes obese or overweight, those fat cells just accumulate and become bigger and bigger and bigger. And what happens is it ends up spilling over or exploding and spilling over into the bloodstream. And then that's when we have insulin resistance problem as well. And so the cell is not able to handle all of this fat. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how to reverse that and how to get rid of it. And that's why with Ha'ihuola, we introduced the plant-based diet. So the medical term, by the way, is called intramyocellular lipids. That's the fats that's collecting in the cell. Intra means inside, myo is muscle, cellular is cell, and then the lipids is fat. So excessive amounts of these lipids in your muscles, it's going to start to create this toxic fatty breakdown product. And then what happens is free radicals start to increase in your body, which blocks insulin transport processes. And so that's one of the reasons why you're starting to have problems with diabetes. And that's why a lot of times diabetes will occur with people who are more overweight. Interestingly enough, there was a study that was done where these researchers actually was able to look at when someone ate a high fat diet, they were able to track the fat in the cells and see how it actually almost immediately and for a course of like 2.5 hours start increasing insulin resistance, which means that it started to glom on to the receptors as well. So that study was really telling and important because then it started to explain why type 2 diabetes was happening. Now I have a lot of people that come to me and say, well, I'm on the ketogenic diet and my husband or brother or whoever is on it and they have no body fat and they are, they're lean and they're muscular and they're doing like super awesome. Well, there was a study that was done, let me close this out. Okay, there was a study that was done, let's see, stop share. Sorry, people. There was a study that was done with 26 20-year-olds, and they were children of diabetics, and they wanted to see if it was genetic or not. But these 26-year-olds, they're about 26 to 28 years old. They were actually very healthy. They looked at their A1C, and all of them had between 5.1 to about 5.2%, which is considered low actually and normal. And they were thin and they seemed really, really healthy because they were in their 20s and they were fit and whatnot. But what the researchers wanted to do was they wanted to see, well, what actually is happening in the cell? So they looked at two groups of the 26. Some of them were eating more healthy, more like vegetables and fruit, and the other one was more on a high fat diet, or like a ketogenic diet. And what they found was pretty startling. They put them in a kind of like an MRI machine, and they saw so much fat collection in the 26 to 28-year-olds that were having were eating high fat diets. And so it was pretty alarming to them because on the outside, they looked really healthy and great, but on the inside, their cells were full of fat. And so the doctors had said, well, we're pretty certain that these people are on track to become diabetic, or at least have pre-diabetic conditions in the future. So other studies started to look at, well, where is this coming from? Because if it's not genetic, then obviously it's fat induced, so it's got to be diet. So they started to do tons of research on this topic, and it's pretty staggering what they're finding. When often I hear this so often, people tell me, my mom was diabetic, my grandmother's diabetic, so then I'm going to be diabetic. And they think that that is what's going to happen to them. But the reality is it's not necessarily genetic, especially with type 2 diabetes. We already know that it's heavily influenced by lipids. So what the researchers discovered, and it's really sensitive to talk about this because people get kind of defensive, but it's primarily because you're probably eating what you grew up with, and your parents probably were eating what they grew up with. So if you grew up in say a low income area like how I did, we were not well to do at all growing up in Nanakuli. So we had access to the convenience stores and cheap food. Spam musubi, 99 cents, manapua, 99 cents, right? So when you start to look at those types of foods and you look at that type of diet, then you start to see the trends of generational output relative to diabetes, especially type 2. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's genetic. It actually it's diet. So I'm gonna talk about some of the fats. I know people ask about that. They want to know about the different fats. So there's saturated fat, because not all fats are going to affect the cells the same way. Saturated fat is the worst. That's the fat that collects in your cells pretty rapidly, like that study had shown, where it's almost quick, where they see the effect of insulin resistance happening as you eat one fat meal. High fat meal. So with saturated fat, that includes things like any kind of animal products. So lots of, beef, because beef has a lot of fats in it, especially if you like the marbled steaks and whatnot. Pork, chicken, dairy, eggs, any kind of processed foods, like the bacons and the spams and the Vienna sausage and all the stuff that our local people love. And so there is no wonder why, diabetes has increased by 10% in the last 2 years in Hawaii. So these types of foods, they have studies that show that it causes insulin resistance, inflammation, increase in free radicals in your body, and it also damages the cells in your pancreas, which is really problematic because your pancreas is responsible for creating the insulin, which helps to open the glucose transport, which allows the glucose to enter into the cells, as opposed for it to keep backing up into your blood system. But so those are the fats that we have to really curtail, especially if you know someone who is diabetic or someone that has been diagnosed as pre-diabetic. Now, all of these things can be reversed. Interestingly enough, there's other types of fats that are not as bad. If you talk to Dr. Esselstyn, and Dr. Ornish, I don't know if any of you have been through the Ornish program or know of someone that has, they say no oil. And the reason why is because someone with a heart condition, that's really, really important for you not to have any oils. But there are some types of fats that are really important, like unsaturated fats. That includes like olives and avocado and nuts. Of course, you don't want to have tons of it, but they actually help to combat or reverse some of the negative impact of saturated fats, because every single diet has to have fat. interestingly enough, when America started to go on this no fat thing diet happening or whatnot, they actually saw a rise in a lot of physical ailments, because your body does need some fat in order for it to function properly. And instead, what they replaced the fat with was more sugar, salt, and that made them more addicted to something, that the taste of those things, which was not helpful for them at all. So anyway, let me see. I'm going to talk about different studies relative to plant-based diets. So just to let you know, I am vegan, of course. I love Nalo. I am not trying to make anybody vegan. That's not my goal at all. My goal is to teach people that it's important to have more plants in your diet, fruit in your diet, even if you're diabetic. That's my intention. That's my goal. It's not to make you vegan at all. There's lots of study that show people that just increase their plant intake or their fruit intake helps to lessen their physical ailments. So I'm gonna share a recent study. They had conventional dieters. So they had one group that ate regular type of meal. So they ate whatever they wanted. Their A1C baseline was at 7.88. It was a 22-week study. After 11 weeks, they told them, try to curtail the amount of meats that you eat, but everything else just stayed the same. After 11 weeks, their A1C dropped to 7.42, 7.42, which is actually really good. It's about 0.4 absolute percentage points, which is positive. And usually that happens when someone is put on any type of diabetic insulin or medication. So that's good. But after week 22, it went back up to 7.5 because people start to get a little bit more comfortable, and then they just continue eating whatever they want. And then what they did was they put another group of people on a vegan diet. Their baseline was actually higher than the conventional group. It was at 8.07. After 11 weeks, it dropped down to 7.18. That's huge, you guys. That's 1.2 absolute percentage points. That's like unheard of. No medication out there does that. And after week 22, it dropped down even further to 6.84. And then after tracking these people over 2 years, they either maintained it or it went up only like a couple of, like half a point or something like that, but they maintained their A1C and was able to stay in the healthy zone, which is really important because a lot of people will fall off the wagon and whatnot. But I think when people shift to more plant-based, their whole palate changes. And they actually start to taste food. Because a lot of times when you're eating conventional food, the American diet is what we call it. The American diet is full of like hamburgers, hot dogs, you know, steak, eggs, chicken, turkey, all of that stuff. Lots of fast food. So that conventional diet is high sugar, high fat, and high salt. And because of that, you become addicted to those flavors. I'm actually going to have a class on that, discussing what's called the bliss point. But anyway, so you become addicted to that. So then when you actually eat other types of foods that are healthy for you and that your body actually wants and craves, it's not sweet enough or it's not salty enough. So you start to add all the table salt, sugar, and all that stuff because you're addicted to it. But on a vegan diet, as you slowly curtail or cut back on the meat products, or you cut back on, maybe not necessarily cutting it out completely, but if you cut back on it, your taste buds actually start to change. People in the halal, I see Kumu Lemomi is on, people in the halal actually can vouch for this. Your taste buds do absolutely change and you start to taste food differently. Spices are more spicy, salt is more salty, sweet is even more sweet. So having people on a plant-based diet not only helps with these pre-diabetic conditions or diabetic conditions, but it also helps with weaning you off your addictions to salt and sugar. Another study that was done, they took 89,000 Californians with diabetes, and they changed their eating habits. And the results were pretty staggering relative to how they cut their diabetic prevalence. For people that turned pescatarian, they went on a pescatarian diet. So that means that they're eating fish primarily as their protein source. They cut their diabetic prevalence by 50%. Those that went on a vegetarian diet, so they probably were still eating eggs and dairy, they cut their diabetic prevalence by 61%. And then people on a vegan diet cut it by 78%. That's pretty staggering. So to show that a plant-based diet is actually really super important and that it can actually help with your diabetes. Another study, they did a 16-day study, placed diabetics on a plant-based diet, and they weighed them every single day. And some of these diabetics, they actually were diabetic for over 20 years, and they were injecting about 20 to 32 units of insulin a day. So they were in not so good shape. A lot of them were losing weight on the plant-based diet, but this particular study, they didn't want people to lose weight. So when someone started to lose weight because they were eating more plants and fruit, they made them eat more so that they maintained their weight, because they wanted to see the effect of insulin, even if they didn't lose weight. And what they found was that those most on the vegan diet cut their insulin requirements by 60%. So plants are so important for us to eat on a daily basis. Some of the possible outcomes that you would experience on a vegan or plant-based diet would be weight loss, decrease in blood pressure, decrease your cholesterol. We've had people increase their energy, mental clarity came back. And reduction in glucose levels. That's really important to know, because if you are thinking about, okay, I either myself or someone that I know and love and care about is either pre-diabetic or diabetic, and you're trying to figure out how to improve their circumstance, you're thinking, okay, we have to cut out the fat because we know already that what's happening in the cells and that the fat is stopping the insulin from going into the receptor sites. Now, remember, your insulin is working. Your key is working. There's nothing wrong with your key. What's wrong is your lock. It's the insulin receptor is all glommed up with, fats, with lipids. So we need to melt that away. And ironically, when you're on a plant-based diet, that's exactly what happens. But if you're thinking about how am I going to help someone, and you decide that you're going to increase your plant intake, so you're going to have more fruits and vegetables. If you are diabetic or pre-diabetic and you're on medication or taking insulin, there's a couple of things that you need to know. First of all, you must see your doctor. I have a doctorate in education, but I am not a medical doctor, and I'm not pretending to have a medical degree by any means. But what I need to tell you is that you have to go see your doctor, and here's the reason why. There's two things that you might face if you start to increase your plant intake while you're trying to melt away all the lipids in your cells. Because you're taking either insulin or medication for your diabetes, what's happening is your blood sugar is actually coming down because of the impact of the medication. Now, if you start to eat more plants, you're naturally going to lose weight. You're naturally going to have lower blood sugar in your system. So what's going to happen is you may become hypoglycemic. And only temporary. It's like really, it's short, and that's one of the reasons why you have to see your doctor, because you have to make sure that the insulin that you're taking is on par for what your body needs. And the reason why is when you are eating a plant-based diet, your blood sugar is going to automatically drop, like I said. So your blood sugar can reduce dramatically, and it's going. Your blood sugar can reduce dramatically, and then it may be too much for you. And that's why you might get lightheaded, or you might get kind of dizzy or whatever. So you may show signs of hypoglycemia. So of course, in order to combat that, Dr. Bernard and all the experts like Dr. Greger and whatnot, they say, you know, have orange juice or something a little bit more sugary to balance you out. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you see your doctor and let them know that you're going to be eating more plants or moving toward a plant-based diet or vegetarian or pescatarian or whatever it is that you choose to do. Of course, vegan is way better. You're going to see faster results. Our people on the Ha'ihuola program last year saw quick results from eating the food. The second thing that you have to let your doctor, why you got to let your doctor know that you're going to be transitioning to more plant-based is because of hypotension. You might have hypotension. A lot of times people who are diabetic also have high blood pressure, which is not uncommon because of course your lipids are clogging your cells and it is clogging your arteries and whatnot. So it's not a surprise that you would have a high blood pressure as well. So you may suffer from hypertension, which again would cause a low blood sugar. So when you lay down, for example, if your blood sugar is low and you're eating more plant-based, your blood pressure is automatically going to drop on this type of diet. So if you're taking a blood pressure medication and it's bringing it down, and then you're eating a vegetarian or vegan diet, it's going to come down even more. So say you're sitting down and you stand up and then you might get like lightheaded or dizzy or whatnot. That can happen. So what you want to do is make sure that your doctor is aware that you're eating more plants and vegetables. You want to track that so that they know how to address your insulin or the medication that you're taking, whether it's for your diabetic condition or your blood pressure. For anyone that is taking anticoagulants, you have to also let your doctor know that you're changing your diet. The reason why is because plants have a lot of vitamin K, and vitamin K can disrupt the effects of like warfarin or Coumadin. So if you are on that type of medication, please let your doctor know. According to Dr. Bernard, he said that you actually can eat plants. Some doctors just say stay away, but that's not good advice according to Dr. Bernard. He said what you want to do is you want to eat fruits and vegetables, but you want to have it consistent throughout the whole day, so you're not going up and down in variabilities of your diet. You want to kind of like, if you're going to eat a salad with each meal, then make sure that you do it consistently throughout the day, and then let your doctor know so that they can adjust your medication. So anyway, that's kind of it, you guys. That's kind of it. Let's see. Some people do ask if they do switch to they need protein. And I just want to let you know, so many people tell me that. They're like, where do you get your protein? Do you know that plants, especially vegetables, have so much protein and calcium? People think that they need to drink cow's milk to get calcium. The reality is that cows do not produce calcium. The way that they actually have calcium in their body is by eating grass. The grass that they eat actually goes into their body, and then when the mothers of the mother cows are producing milk, the calcium gets transported into their milk. So everyone thinks you're supposed to get calcium that way, but actually you can get calcium, more calcium by eating vegetables. Protein as well, like I said, and dark leafy greens is enough. And then legumes, what you want to do is have legumes, so beans. Interestingly enough, like if anybody is on our plant-based diet or our meal plans with I Love Nalo, you'll have things like tomorrow we're providing baked oatmeal. Our oatmeal actually has beans in it. So people don't realize that they're eating beans with their oatmeal because I use cannellini beans, because cannellini beans are white beans. Any type of white bean is not that strong of a bean taste. So what we do is we put it in the Vitamix, we blend it up with the coconut milk so that it mixes in there and you can't even taste it. And then people that eat it, they don't realize that they're getting a ton of protein because we throw that in there. We also throw in hemp seeds. We throw in, which has high protein. We also throw in flax. Flax meal is very important. Everyone should be getting a tablespoon of flax meal every single day. So, and then also people wonder about carbs. So they say, well, I can't have carbs. I can't have pasta and I can't have white bread and whatnot, which is true. If you're diabetic, you really don't want to do that. And it's because of the glucose molecules in those things that actually break apart in your digestive system and flood your bloodstream. Fructose is a bit different because fruit actually breaks down different. It has to go through your liver first in order for it to go into your blood system. So it doesn't respond the same way as like a bagel would or white bread or whatever. But here's what's interesting, you guys. In the 1960s and 70s, in Japan, the primary staple that they ate was rice and soba noodles. And back in the 60s and 70s, they hardly had any diabetes. I think it was it was between 1% to 5% of their population had diabetes. And then in the 1980s, all of a sudden there was an uptick of diabetes showing up in Japan. And they tried to figure out what it was, like what was the cause. And then they realized it was because there was an influx of the Western American diet. All the fast food chains started to show up and pop up in Tokyo and Osaka and all those places. And people started to change their diet and eat more of that type of food. And so there was an uptick of diabetes. And so that was the reason why. So it wasn't the white rice. It wasn't the soba noodles that was causing that. Now, here's what's important to know about this. If you have a healthy body that doesn't have all this fat gummed up in your receptor sites, that's not allowing the glucose transport to have the glucose go into your cells and function properly and give your cells the energy that it needs. And there isn't backup of glucose in your bloodstream. It's okay for you to eat white pasta and, breads and whatnot. You don't want to go overboard with anything in your diet, but it's okay for you to eat that. It's the same thing with type 2 diabetes. And the reason why is because your key is not broken. Your body is making the insulin. The problem is the fat, the lipids that are stuck in your cells. So you can't have the white pastas and potatoes and stuff right now because you have too much fat that's stuck in your cells and in your insulin receptor sites. So what you need to do is you need to reverse that first. And then once you get to a comfortable state, then you can start introducing those types of foods more into your system. Now, with our meal plan, we have potatoes in the stew. We have ono potatoes, we have pasta, and all the people that was in our Ha'ihola program last year, even those that were either diabetic or pre-diabetic, still had these types of foods. One woman had her glucose level was at over 200, I think, and after I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Kumu, after a couple of weeks, it dropped down to 91, which is remarkable, and she was still having these things like we use whole wheat buns for our sandwich, for our burgers. We had potatoes and pasta and all those kinds of things, but it still dropped because it was combined with the beans, the legumes, with fruit, with other things that are healthy for them. So because of the combination of all those things, it wasn't where it was shooting off the Richter because the body still had other things in their system that was breaking the food down. So for example, the potato, we give them a baked potato, but the cheese is made out of cashew nut. So it's made with nuts. It also has nooch, or nutritional yeast, which has vitamin B12 in it. It also has, we put in we call it cocoa bacon, but it's not bacon, it's just coconut. So coconut is in there. We saute vegetables, so like zucchini and mushrooms and onion and garlic and bell peppers and just all kinds of stuff, and we throw that on top of it. So when they're eating the potato, it's not just the starch goes directly into their system, which what happens with starches, but the body is also having to process all the other things that we're adding with the potato. It's just not butter and potato. So that's kind of a little bit of the secret. So can you have carbs with diabetes? We have people that ate some carbs, but we also include tons of plant. I mean, it's all plant, but tons of like leafy greens and all kinds of other vegetables in the diet combined with the starch. So it's not just high starch. And then what else? I think people ask about protein, carbs. So eating a plant-based diet, it's just so fantastic for you, especially when you truly understand diabetes and what happens.